Shalom, and welcome to a message for the Parsha for Parshat Korach. Now, Korach, unfortunately, met a very bitter end. But Korach, what was it that caused him to be punished so severely? Well, he unfortunately led a major opposition against Moshe, against the first and ultimate leader of the Jewish people. In fact, Moshe did so many miracles. Moshe is responsible for delivering us the Torah and so on. And yet, Korach, for whatever reason, was it ego, was it jealousy, he found it in him to assemble people, to instigate this opposition to Moshe. And he wouldn't back down. And finally, as the Parsha tells us, unfortunately, he was swallowed into the ground together with his cohorts. Now, interestingly, this Parsha typically coincides with the third of Tammuz. Now, what is the third of Tammuz? The third day of the month, the Hebrew month of Tammuz. That is the Yortzeit. That is the anniversary of passing of the Rebbe, which is an amazingly special day because you see, the anniversary of the day of the passing of a tzaddik is not just another anniversary, but in fact, it's a time for reconnection to the tzaddik. And that's a time, as it's described in the Kabbalah, where every soul, especially the soul of a tzaddik, gets elevated to much higher and loftier levels in heaven. And by virtue of the fact that this is a tzaddik, the tzaddik redistributes that great holy lofty levels, those great holy lofty levels to his followers, those who are connected to him. So Korach is actually a lesson. It's not by coincidence that it coincides together. In fact, interestingly, this year 2022, actually it not just coincides in close proximity, but the third of Tammuz actually falls out on a Shabbat. So it tells us this is a very powerful connection. So I just want to focus in on two aspects of the Parsha that, really strongly connect to the Rebbe. And I think this should serve as an inspiration, as a great source of encouragement for us to strengthen our connection to the Rebbe, or establish or reestablish our connection with the Rebbe. And that is as follows. You see, number one, what you see here is something that we learn. What we learn here, what we glean from this Parsha is that the authority of Moshe, the power of Moshe, the special privilege that Moshe has to deliver to us the blessings from Hashem, the teachings from Hashem, the messages from God, and likewise that the people have a special privilege and a special opportunity to connect to Hashem through Moshe. This we see in the sum total of this week's Parsha. And when that is challenged, that sadly can end very not well. In other words, the reason why it would end not well is not because God is so punishing or vindictive, or God forbid that Moshe is a vindictive person. It's just that something that does not sit with the reality that Hashem established, it just doesn't exist. It doesn't have the means of existence. It cannot go on. In other words, it's almost like if someone should, for example, I'm just using this as an example. If someone should, for example, ingest poison, they can't expect to ingest poison and to continue living, because they have now deliberately disconnected themselves from the ability to continue to have body and soul together. Likewise, somebody should disconnect themselves from the Moshe. In those days it was Moshe, and as the Zohar tells us, that there is, quote, a Moshe in every single generation. Every single generation has a Moshe. Thus, by being connected to Moshe, one is connected to the source of life, through him to the connection to Hashem. But God forbid when one deliberately severs their connection from Moshe, then unfortunately, as we see in this week's Parsha, that can bring, unfortunately, unwanted and certainly not happy results However, with the Rebbe, who is, of course, the Moshe of our generation, we find over and over again how the Rebbe taught us and led by example that the way to go about this connection between the people and Hashem, and of course, in this case, with the connection with the Rebbe, the connection with the Moshe of our generation, is only in a manner of kindness. Whereas Moshe in our Parsha, in Korach, had no choice, so to speak. He was left with no choice. And unfortunately, it led to these very sad, unfortunate results, whereas by the Rebbe, always, without exception, the Rebbe saw to it in any way possible, only with kindness, to bring to it that people should become closer to Hashem. So that's one point, one aspect of the Parsha that really, really connects and resonates with the third of Tammuz. That there's a Moshe in every single generation. But another thing, there's an interesting question here. The name of the Parsha is Korach. Now we do know that typically we shy away from even mentioning the name of a wicked person. In other words, the name of a wicked person, as there's a verse that says, Shem Rishaim Yirkav, let the names of the wicked rot. In other words, it's not something that we want to touch. The question is, how do we name an entire Parsha in the Torah, and it becomes known as such, with all the legal ramifications, as Korach? Korach was a wicked man. Korach did something so terrible. In fact, if we look in the Mishnah and Pirkei Avot, in the Ethics of the Fathers, when it wants to give us an example of what bad machloket is, machloket means when you have opposition, when you have discord, it uses Korach as the bad boy poster child of discord, of unnecessary discord, of baseless hatred. So then why would we name a Parsha after him? Well, the Rebbe explains that indeed his actions were bad, but deep down his intentions and his arguments actually were true. In fact, even Moshe himself said to him, I agree with you. In principle, I agree with you. But it's just that Hashem wants it to play out differently right now, and therefore you can't stand up against it. What was his main argument, as it says in the Torah? He came to Moshe and he said, Kulam Kiddoshim, they're all holy. And Hashem is amongst all the Jews. Why should one be greater than the other? In other words, he was demanding, he was fighting for unity. In that sense, he was 100% right. He was so righteous. And that is the point. And that we see by the Rebbe. The Rebbe was the one who brought together all different types of Jews from all walks of life and always maintained the fact that we're all the same. Connect to the Rebbe, be part of the Rebbe, and may the blessings that the Rebbe always gives fall on you and your family for much revealed good and happiness.